Shannon, welcome to Women's Circle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being on here. Um, Now, I know that you have a really interesting story to share, and one that will resonate with our audience. But I'd love to hear, before we get into that, your journey before you were a mother,
Yeah.
and where you've kind of come from for a bit of context, and then head into what happened on your journey. That would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose before I became a mother, even though I've only been a mother for 3 years, it still seems like a lifetime ago, my before motherhood experiences. But prior to that, I grew up in Brisbane, lived in Brisbane all my life, traveled a bit. I love traveling, lived overseas for a little while. I've been with my high school sweetheart, I suppose you could say, since we were 17. And we got married, bought a house in Brisbane, had our first little fur baby, our beautiful little puppy dog, Elfie. He is the absolute joy of my life. I think he is, I know he is. And prior to that, I really loved sports. I love running. We've run the New York Marathon together with my husband. We're very competitive with each other, which makes sports events like those and triathlons and things like that even more interesting to do together. And I did the usual things, finished high school, studied, went to university, and started working. And since then, I'll probably say I'm a person that very career orientated, very goal driven in that sense. Motherhood was something probably that I didn't necessarily gravitate to. I wasn't ever one of those people that saw a little baby and was like, oh my gosh, let me cuddle it, that's the best thing in the world. I would kind of be like, oh, I'm just going to stand back here and wave and say hello. And I was a little bit awkward, I would say, around children. I was the youngest in my family. I was the youngest of the cousins, so I never really grew up, I suppose, with small children around me. So I never thought that I would necessarily be a mum to a human baby. Animals very different. But obviously, my husband and I made the decision that, hey, it's one of those things. It's now or never. If we do this now or we don't. And I knew my husband very much wanted to be a dad, and we did see it in our future together. I never envisioned us not having a family, but it was just about timing and when. And so, we took the plunge, and, very fortunately, we fell pregnant very quickly, probably too quickly. We didn't expect it to be so quick, with our beautiful daughter, Emily, and she's 3 now. And she's the absolute joy to be around. She has taught me so much about myself, and about, my husband, about relationships, life, that there are other things outside of work and running, and my dog, that that there's a little human life to nurture and nourish. And I think through being her mum, she's really changed me to see that there's so much more out there. It's not just me. And as a mum, you become, I think, so selfless. It's not about you anymore, it's about somebody else. And that is the best thing in the world, to be doing this for somebody else. And that's probably been a huge learning for me, in that I just love being a mum to Emily, and now I'm a mum to Lucas as well. We had our son born just in April of this year, so we've been blessed with 2 little people, and that's more than enough, I think, to handle.
So I love that story, and I love how you had this idea, and what stuck in my head, that you're like, I was very goal orientated, I was very focused in my career. What is your career, by the way, just so we...
Yes, so I work in online travel, which is quite an interesting time to be in travel given COVID, etc. But I work for Expedia Group, and love looking after the hotels that list on our website, and creating revenue strategies for them, and all about getting people out there and traveling. That's my main job.
So that would make sense with the travel, and then the working in the travel. So when you said you never envisioned having children, but it was kind of always in the plan. When you decided that you were going to have children, was that a very conscious conversation that you sat down with your husband and had?
Yes, because we'd spoken about it, and I, to be totally honest, was so hesitant about it because I didn't know if I would be a good mum. I really worried about that. I also had a bit of a fear of loss as well. I've been so fortunate in my life in that I've never had a big loss. I have my parents with me. My grandparents lived. I've still got one living. I've never experienced a very close loss, or if I did, I was too young to know. So for some reason I had this fear of loss. What happened if I lost the baby or I lost the child, and I mean, I think as a mum you still fear that, because they're just the absolute most precious things in the world to you. But that was really sort of stopping me initially. And my husband, we sort of just had to say, okay, you can't control these things. It's either you do it or you don't. That's what you can control. But other than that, you have to kind of just go for it. So we had a conversation. We're like, okay, let's try and let's just see what happens. And as I said, it happened much quicker than we expected. But look, we're very grateful for that.
Meant to be. And would you say that you're complementary to each other in, could you voice that, there's this strange fear of loss that I have that I really don't know where it comes from, but it's obviously rooted in childhood somewhere. Like, are you able to have those conversations? Because I think that's really important before you have a baby.
Yeah, I did explain. I did say that to him. I said, I just have this fear of loss, and I think it probably surprised him. I can't completely remember that conversation, but I remember when he was sort of like, okay, what's your kind of barrier, and that was one of the things that came up, and other silly little things as well, like, oh, what about my body, like, because I do love running and being fit and healthy, and the thought of, oh my gosh, and I realize now, I mean, that is so not important, right? But at the time, you don't know what you don't know. And so that was one of the things as well, with this sort of, this fear of loss, and would I be a good mom? I'm not totally maternal to children. Will that affect me being a mom? And, I also spoke to my own mum about that. And, she always said to me, look, when and if you have children, you will absolutely love them. I know you will. You just can't help yourself. And that helped as well, hearing my mum, say, look, you will love them.
Oh, that's so good. So you had good support.
Yeah.
I love how you said that your daughter has really, like, when she came along, it really opened up some, I would say, awareness within yourself that you had no idea about. And you talked about how this selflessness came out. Do you feel like that has flowed on to other areas of your life?
I think it's given me a much bigger appreciation, certainly for my mother, for my grandmothers, like particularly, mothers in general, but also fathers too, in seeing what, the dads do and the support that they provide to the mother. And my husband is a super hands-on dad, very, very fortunate in that respect. So it's given me a much greater appreciation of that. But particularly, the sacrifices that, women do make, when they are mothers, and particularly in this day and age where it's, there's so much out there and there's so much you're expected to be doing, whether it's, career, being a mum, or, hitting goals in your personal life. And, there's so many, I suppose, expectations or societal expectations. So it's just given me a much greater appreciation and understanding. And also as well to, I'm a manager, a leader within my role, and my role is obviously I manage people, and seeing, mothers that I have led or managed in the past, and it's given me a really good point of reflection in terms of, okay, was I understanding enough? Did I ask them about their children enough? Did I have enough, curiosity about what is it like to be them outside of work, and the pressures that happen, as a mum, you might go to work on 2 hours of sleep or less. And, were my expectations, within line, or was I expecting too much? So there's a lot of that kind of awareness that it's brought to me, in work life, personal life, in that sense.
It's empathy, isn't it? Like, you understand now, and you cannot understand something that you have not experienced, and nor do you expect anyone else to. And I think that's this is the I don't know how you feel about it, but children are great and they're amazing and we love them, but if you don't have them, you don't know that. And it's hard, isn't it, when people are like, oh, you've got to have them because they're the best thing, and it's like, well, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like, yeah, you know from your experience what it gives you, and that empathy, and it's really helped to support all areas of your life. But there's also an awareness that comes that that's been your journey and doesn't have to be everyone's journey. Does that kind of resonate with you? Like, that kind of came up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. And you're so right. You have no idea until you are a mum. And that's probably been the biggest eye-opening thing, because I think when you don't have children, you've got all these ideas and philosophies and, oh, I wouldn't do that, or if I was that mother, or I would do this. And, you're so judgmental, and, you just sort of can't help yourself, I suppose, in some senses. It's human nature. You're looking at what's going on around you and you're making judgments based on what you think. And until you are a mum, oh man, like, you have no idea. And so that's been such an eye-opener. And I just think sometimes I think, oh wow, like, you see a mum or a dad, a parent trying to deal with a kid breaking down, and you've got all these thoughts of what you should do. And now that's me. Yeah. And completely different, right? Because now I know.
I literally saw a woman yesterday at the shopping center with her child just having a meltdown, and I was like, in my head, I was like, girlfriend, I've been there.
Yeah.
You're like, my heart goes out to you, like, all power to you. There is zero judgment. And it's unfortunate that we have to go through the experience to learn zero judgment. But here we are. We all have our opportunities, and this is one for us. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to get into, so after the birth of your daughter, that was a smooth birth?
Yeah, no, very smooth, very, easy. I mean, easy enough pregnancy. I had a lot of morning sickness for most of it, but other than that, she was very, very healthy little baby. And birth and everything went well. We went home from the hospital, and we started our life with this perfect little girl.
Oh, and you got into the groove, and I love that you were like, I don't know if I'll be a good mom. At what point, and I'm not saying, like, I know we have a lot of mom guilt and we're always questioning whether we are, but at some point there would have been a realization within yourself where you're like, you know what, I actually can do this. Do you remember that point?
I think, there was, when my daughter was little, and I think, when my husband went back to work, he's had a couple of weeks off with us, which was wonderful. But when he went back to work, it was like, okay, it's all on you now. You've got this, kind of that self-talk, like, you can do this,
Came in handy.
Yeah, exactly. It is. And so I think, there were some days there where, look, I definitely didn't have it together and, lost my mind a few times. But then there were those days where I was like, yeah, I can do this. She's fed, she's clean, she's smiling, she's laughing, or even those little things where I would venture outside, I'd go to the shops. I remember the first time I did the groceries with her. And these little wins, right? But I was like, yeah, I've got this. I can take a little baby out, and I can do the groceries, and I can do normal everyday things with this little person. So I think those little wins along the way, I sort of thought, yeah, I can do it. But yeah, like you said, there's some days where I think, oh my goodness, what am I doing? I still don't know sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah, which is so normal. But I love that you have that inner just that inner reassurance, and that comes from a place of, it does come from a place of having done a lot of work within yourself, and potentially that came from, it may have been sport for you. I don't know. I'd love you to elaborate if there's been, because it is a mental game, isn't it? Like, we train, we focus, we have to, everything's flooding in and trying to take our attention, and we've got this goal, as you said. And I wonder if that's been helpful for you to transfer into this space. Is that?
Yeah. No, I think it does, definitely. And I think it, that sort of thing can transfer in so many other experiences as well, but particularly, in motherhood for sure. I mean, with the training, with particularly marathons, it's such, you know, endurance, and it gets to a point where it's not your body anymore, it's your head that you need to control, and you need to, yeah, have that really positive talk. You know, you can do this. I remember when we did the my husband and I together, we did the Gold Coast Marathon, and you know, there's a saying where, you know, you hit a wall and you just, everything is just falling apart. And I remember it was around the 32k mark, and you know, I really had to kind of, you know, it just takes grit, you know, and really talk to myself and, you know, get through this. And I was lucky enough to have my husband there supporting me as well. And then when he hit the wall, you know, the roles changed, and I was there to support him. So together, I think we've obviously been able to support each other a lot through this. But being able to stop that negative talk and, oh, I'm such a bad mom, or I did this wrong, or I, you know, that was really stupid, or why did I say that? You know, it is important sometimes to just, yeah, check yourself, you know, reset. You know, I even had a moment this morning, when I was having my shower, reset. You know, I wasn't happy with one of my parenting choices this morning with my daughter and just reset and, you know, have that, again, it's going to be a good day, I can do this, you know, that sort of thing. So it does really play a really important part in, you know, how you see things, or your outlook in terms of how you speak to yourself.
Self-reflection, isn't it? It's such a big thing. And look, I cannot relate to a marathon. That's amazing. I think I've done a 10k run, and but that actually having to speak to yourself, I'd never really understood that until that moment when I was running that. Like, I've run it by myself, but when you're in that kind of competition scenario, they're not fun run. But I understand the act. You mentally have to focus and go, I'm okay, I am safe, I've got this, I can do this. And I do, you know, it just makes me think that if we took that approach to mothering, it does really help. It's a practical tool to actually give ourselves self-talk, because it's the same way, like, I always think about, how do I speak to Ziggy? How do I speak to my son? When he's upset, when he's tantruming, when he's angry, you know, do I shut that down? Or do I actually support that? Because it's the same with us. When I'm having these feelings like I'm not good enough, or I made a bad decision, am I shutting myself down and making me and shaming myself? Because what help does that have? So I love that. I think that self-talk is a really, really important and positive tool. And I just want to ask, you know, when you do have those moments, we all do, where you go, oh, that was a bad parenting decision, but we're human. Do you feel like you can go back to your child and communicate that? Like, or like, what's your kind of process for that?
Yeah, it's something I'm still learning how to do. And I have, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading. Obviously, I've got well, he's not newborn anymore, he's 8 months, but he still feeds all night like a newborn. So I have a lot of, you know, Instagram and time on, you know, mothering journals and things like that at night time, and sort of doing a lot of research into that, you know, how you can, you know, reset, or how you manage your own feelings, you know, when you get those triggers from your own children. And so I've tried to, look, I don't do it all the time, but I've tried to instill a little bit more of, okay, you know, mummy, you know, was feeling very frustrated then, or I was very stressed out about this, and, you know, I yelled and I'm very sorry about that. And, you know, and we sort of have those little mini conversations in that. And, you know, I'll say to her, I've started saying, look, you know, when she's angry, you know, it's okay to be angry, you know, but it's not okay to hit mummy, or something like that, you know, and we talk about that. So that I'm starting to bring that as much as I can into the way I sort of, I guess, mother or discipline in a sense. And it was really sweet. One time, just a couple of weeks ago, I took my daughter and my son to a play group, and it was just, I had no sleep the night before, and my son was a bit out of sorts, and I was, you know, sometimes it gets too much, and I just couldn't help myself. I just started to cry, and I just said, I'm sorry, darling, we just need to go home. And I put her in the car, and she was so understanding, and she just took my hand and she said, Mummy, it's okay to be sad, I'm here. And it just, you know, and it brought happy tears to my eyes, because I just thought, wow, you know, she is listening to me. And that's some things I say to her, not all the time. I wish I was that present enough, you know, and not, you know, with other things in my mind. But when she has been sad, you know, I often say to her, it's okay to be sad, and mummy's here, you know, that sort of thing. But when she just looked up at me and held my hand, it's okay to be sad, mummy. And I was just like, oh, you little angel.
validation, isn't it? That you're a good human, and like you're trying to instill these philosophies onto your child. And I think that makes perfect sense. You know, if that's the language that they're hearing, then they can come back and say that to you. That's really beautiful. Good on you, Mum.
Little wins, got to take them.
Yeah, and like, and this is the thing. I mean, I listen to some amazing people that talk a lot about, you know, the greatest gift you can give your child is to heal yourself, and it's a simultaneous kind of process where you're becoming aware of you and your actions and your conditionings and your beliefs that may or may not serve you anymore. And at the same time, you're then reflecting this more aware, conscious, present self with your child. And it's sort of, it is this beautiful process that unfolds. And you know, we can't beat ourselves. Well, we shouldn't beat ourselves up for becoming aware each time. You know, even something, it was my son's birthday yesterday, and his dad and I took him to like one of those indoor play gaming centers, and we were bowling, and I just had this awareness of like how competitive I am. Like, you know, that I never had before. And his dad was like, "Are we going to let him win?" I was like, "No," because then he'll think that he always wins. And then I kind of like checked myself, and I was like, where has that come from?
Yeah.
Is that a condition within my own upbringing that, you know, you have to be competitive because that's how it is. So, you know, you can kind of relax a little, but I wanted to beat myself up first, you know, mentally. I was like, oh, how dare you be competitive? That's such a bad thing. So it makes sense. Like, we should actually celebrate every time something comes to our awareness that we can then work with, because we can't work with things we're not aware of, right? So
exactly.
That's really cool. So so you kind of cruised into motherhood as much as we cruise with your first, and at what point did you decide, let's have another one, and what's that journey been?
Yeah, well, we always thought, you know, we'd want to have two. You know, my husband and I, we've both grown up with siblings, and we just couldn't imagine, you know, kind of having an only child. You know, I had an older sister, and I loved having an older sister. You know, we're really good friends, and my husband grew up with 3 older siblings. So, you know, it's one of those things where you think, you know, we need to give them a sibling, and, you know, just to complete our family. It just, you know, it didn't seem kind of finished yet. So after I got back into running after Emily, and I did my personal best for my half marathon, the Gold Coast half marathon. Well, it was the COVID one. My sister and I did it together, and we did our own version because obviously it was canned because of COVID, but we still did it, and we got a little medal. And did my personal best, and I was like, okay, now I feel right. Okay, I can get back into fitness after a baby. I can do, you know, personal best times. I could do it again. Emily was, she was nearly 2. And, you know, again, it was one of those things, well, I was 34. Okay, a bit older now, might take a while, who knows, you know, and there's all those unknowns. And so I just thought, okay, we'll just give it a try. And yes, very, very quickly fell pregnant again. So it was a bit of a shock, you know, that we often, you know, joke about, because my husband at the time, he had the flu, and there was something we read that, men who have the flu, that's the only thing that can impact their fertility. Whereas obviously with females, there's a lot of things that can impact your fertility. And the next thing I'm like, well, I'm pregnant. Well, that didn't work, did it? So the pregnancy went pretty smoothly. Again, I was very, very sick, probably a little bit worse this time around. I was a boy, obviously, so maybe that was why. And I was feeling much more fatigued. I had very, very low iron. But I think the fatigue as well comes from also having a toddler at home. You know, it was so different being pregnant when I had a little toddler at home, because I couldn't just come home from work and collapse on the couch like I did when I was pregnant with Emily. It was all on. It was playing with Emily. It was getting her dinner ready. It was, you know, getting her to bed, you know, all the things that you do. So yeah, it was a tough pregnancy.
And just surrounding yourself with
Yeah. So, but we got through it.
So you got through it, and he was born, and then what happened? It didn't go to plan.
No. So he was born. He was within the scans. He was looking really good, really healthy, and he was actually looking to be a very big baby. They were tipping around 4.5 kilos. And I was like, that's not what you want to tell a mum, that there's going to be a big baby with a big head. And so my obstetrician suggested, we induce you only a week early. So I got induced at 39 weeks. And labor went great. He was born super healthy. He wasn't as big as we thought. The scans had been a little bit off, thankfully. He was about 3.6 kilos, so very average, or probably even slightly bigger than average, but nothing huge. He was super healthy. He had all of his checks done after he was born. Everything was looking great. He was very hairy when he was born. He was a very hairy little man, and the pediatrician even said, he could do with a back sack and crack wax because he was so hairy. And even today, he's still got this little hairy back that goes down into his little bum crack, which is quite funny. So he was really, really healthy and feeding really well. He did have a tongue tie, but didn't affect his feeding. And then, we had him, he was at the Wesley Hospital, so I was staying in for about 5 days. My obstetrician had suggested, look, stay for 5 days. You've got a toddler at home. You need to recover before you go home and then have a toddler as well. So thankfully she did, because on day 3 of life for Lucas, our pediatrician came in, they do their regular checks, and I don't know if you remember when Ziggy was born, they do these checks on their legs, like really high up into their groin. Yes. And they're called, they're checking for these femoral pulses. And when Emily was born, obviously they did that as well. And we had the same pediatrician, and in my head was like, they're looking at the movement of her hips, like her hip flexors, like it's really up there. Like are the legs, structure fine or whatever. And so I didn't even think about it, didn't think to ask. My naivety in some of this stuff actually blows my mind now when I think back. But anyway, she was checking for these femoral pulses and she couldn't feel them. And she sort of thought, okay, this is a bit strange. I can't feel these pulses. And again, I had no idea what they meant. What they actually mean is that if they can't feel the little pulses in the groin area, it means that the heart actually isn't pumping blood through the body. So obviously that's not a good sign if they can't feel that, and because it basically, obviously, if blood's not going to the lower half of the body, the kidneys, all the gastrointestinal organs, they will fail, and the baby will die. So she couldn't feel the pulses, and she was looking at his blood pressure charts, because obviously little babies, you're always getting their blood pressure checked on their legs and their arms. And again, now I know why they check for both, to make sure the heart's pumping not only the top half of the body but also pushing blood to the lower half. And all his blood pressure checks were fine, and she thought, that's a bit strange, it must be me. And she's like, I'll come back and I'll check again in a few hours. And I thought, okay, again, no idea what she was meant, didn't factor in it could be an issue. Again, I was thinking, whatever, something with his legs will be fine. And she wasn't too concerned because all the other checks were fine. Then she came back in a couple of hours, checked them again, and she thought, okay, she's like, I can't feel these pulses. And then that's when she sort of explained a little bit around, okay, what it means. And again, I was just so I didn't understand the gravity of it. I think because she was such a wonderful, relaxed doctor as well. She didn't show any signs of stress, thank goodness, which I think just made me go, this is okay, and that was probably the best thing for me at that time, not to be stressed like that, because that day too, my milk had just come in, and he wouldn't want anything to impact that sort of thing. So anyway, she said, look, what I need to do is we need to get his a scan on his ultrasound on his heart. She said, I'll call the doctor who does that, who comes to the Wesley and does that. And I was like, okay, great. Still no idea what was going on. So she called him up. He was in Mount Isa at the time, so he couldn't do it. So then she said to me, okay, we need to get this looked at. She said, the only hospital that can do this is the Mater Hospital, because the doctor that comes to the Wesley to do it is away. So she said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to organise an ambulance to transfer you to the Mater Hospital, and you'll get the scan done there. And she even said, look, I think it should be okay. And she said, you know, if all checks out well, I'll let them know that you can discharge tonight and you can go home. And so I thought, okay, that's fine. And again, in my head, I was like, great, I get to go home tonight. I get to see my daughter. Because of COVID, my daughter wasn't able to come up to the hospital. So I'd only been FaceTiming her. I hadn't seen her. And, you know, it was one of the longest times I'd been away from her. And so, you know, I thought, okay, that's fine. So yeah, we got transferred in the ambulance. He was put in one of the little incubator little things. He slept the whole time. That was the best I think he's ever slept in his life, to be honest. He slept like a little angel the whole journey to the Mater. And when we got to the Mater Hospital, it was just chaos. You know, we got taken from where the ambulances pull up into the emergency, you know, whisked away up into the NICU, the intensive care unit. And again, I wasn't even aware that we were going to intensive care, because I just didn't have that understanding that the severity of this issue. And so we got there, and my husband was there as well. He followed us in the ambulance. I was in the ambulance with my son, and my husband followed in the car. And yeah, we got there, and they took him out of a little incubator. There's nurses everywhere, you know, doctors coming in and out. You know, the NICU's always busy, right? There's just people everywhere. And then they were attaching all these different little monitors and cords and things to his chest, and they put him in, you know, one of the little bays where the little newborns are that need to be in the NICU. And we sort of sat there, and my husband and I kind of look at each other like, what's going on? You know, we don't really understand. And then cardiologist came. She did the ECG, or the echocardiogram, on his chest. And it took a little while to do it, and she wasn't saying much, and you know, we're kind of just sitting there like, what's going on? And then she says, okay, I'm not too happy with what I'm seeing. And we sort of looked at each other, and she said, I just need to get my boss to come and have a look. She was one of the fellows, so she was, you know, training in her cardiology. And so he came, and the most wonderful cardiologist, Dr. Anderson, don't know if you might have seen him there or not with your time in the Mater, but just the most wonderful doctor. And he had a look, and then he explained to us what it actually meant. So when those pulses can't be felt, it means the heart's not pumping blood to the lower half of the body. And it was because his aorta, so that's, you know, your main artery in your heart that really pumps blood through the body, was thinning. And so therefore blood couldn't get through. And so it's called a coarctation of the aorta. And, you know, we kind of just looked at each other, and my husband and I, like, again, like, what does this mean? And I think I was in shock. You know, I can't even really remember what I said or did. I think I just sort of sat there in shock. And my husband, you know, he's very pragmatic and, you know, very good in a crisis. And so he, you know, asked all the questions and said to the doctor, okay, what do we do? How do we fix this? And the doctor said, okay, he will have to have heart surgery. And that was, you know, like a knife to your heart, you know, your own heart. You know, it was such a shock. And then my husband said, because, you know, he likes to know best case, worst case, you know, that sort of thing. And he said to the doctor, to Dr. Anderson, okay, and what happens if we don't have surgery? And he said, he just kind of looked at John and I, and he said to us, he will die. And he said, you know, what will happen is you will go home, and in a few days you will present to your GP or to your emergency department with a very, very lethargic baby who's not feeding, who's just really, you know, really lethargic. And he said, and there'll be very little we can do at that point, because it could have gone too far, because the aorta could have completely closed. So yeah, that just completely changed our whole idea of what it would be like to have our second little baby and bring him home and have our family of 4 plus our dog family of 5 together. So yeah, and I was in such a shock. And at that point, as I said, my milk had just started to come in that day, and I wasn't able to feed him. I wasn't allowed to feed him because whilst they were doing all these checks and things, he needs to have quite an empty stomach. And to prepare him for surgery, he also needed to have quite an empty stomach, because if he had milk and things in his tummy, the gastro system could affect the surgery. I don't know all the ins and outs, but basically there was something that they needed him to be quite empty in his tummy. And so I remember I think when it really hit me was, I said to one of the nurses there, I said, because I wasn't allowed to feed him, I said, can I please express some milk? I was kind of like exploding. And she sort of looked at me, she said, oh yeah, of course. And she's like, well, here's a pump. And she says, oh, now where's your expressing kit? And I just looked at her and I just burst into tears, and I said, I don't have an expressing kit. I'm not supposed to be here like this. It was not in my mind that I would be here, that I would need to be expressing milk. That's I think where I just broke down. And she was just so lovely, and she's like, oh love, let me get you one, you sit here, and she brought everything over to me. And from there I had to pump milk every 3 hours to obviously keep up my supply, but then have some in store for him, because the nurses were able to syringe him some breast milk. It was 3 mils every 3 hours, like tiny little amount. So that was I guess the entry into NICU, and what was ahead for us with Lucas.
My goodness, Shannon. That's so much. So you come to the realization after the shock, and your husband's sort of like, he's getting the facts, so you're working together. So how long after that point did they actually do the surgery?
Yeah, so from that point, and this was probably the hardest thing for me, was the waiting game. So they'd stabilized him. So what they were able to do, thankfully, was intravenously give him a drug called prostaglandin, I think the name is, or prostaglandin, something like that. I think they sort of were calling it Prostalin, I think. And that was keeping his aorta, that was sort of keeping it open so that it would pump blood. Yeah. So in that sense, though he was obviously in ICU, he was stable. Yeah. And because of that, and because he was a good weight, a good healthy weight, he wasn't super duper critical. So obviously when they're taking any patients, they need to, go over on, okay, who is the most critical? Where do the resources need to be? And they couldn't tell us when, because it just depended on what their schedule was and what, cases were just coming in every hour, cases come in, and then that mixes up the schedule. And so, the nurses and the doctors, had really tried to build the confidence in me that, look, he is stable. He's got this drug, and that is, he will be okay whilst he's on that drug. Obviously, he can't be on it for his entire life, but, in the short term, he's okay. And so from then it was, up and down from the hospital every day, pumping milk every 3 hours. It was just so exhausting, mentally and physically, just sitting by his bedside. And every time I'd walk in, I'd just break down and, see a tiny little baby there. And the hardest thing was leaving him. I get so sad when I think about having to go home at night time, particularly that first night. It was a Thursday. He was born on Monday, and it was a Thursday that all this went down, and we left the hospital. And to go home without him, it was just horrible. And I just, little babies, you think, gosh, they need their mums, they need my smell, they need my heartbeat, and he doesn't have that. And it was really hard. So yeah, it was a waiting game for the surgery. We were fortunate though in that he was admitted on Thursday, And then it was the Tuesday that he had the surgery. So we only had to wait, what was that, 5 days? 5 days. Thankfully, because so that was the hardest. It was, I kept saying to my mom, like, I just want him to have the surgery because I want to focus on recovery. But the waiting game, it was so mentally and physically exhausting. And then, of course, the juggle with my daughter as well. You know, can my parents help out? You know, can my husband's parents assist? Daycare? You know, it was, yeah.
Did you feel like you were just purely in survival mode then, or did you have enough? And it's really hard, but sometimes you might have just a little bit enough awareness to kind of see yourself in this, like, or were you just like, man, I'm just trying to take every moment as it comes?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it was just survival. It was just, I knew, like, every 3 hours I had to express milk. You know, that was like, okay, do that, you know, set my alarm for, you know, like, that was what I was focusing on.
Yeah, that's something I can do. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I can kind of control that, get that done. And I knew I was doing it for the greater good. My husband was very conscious of looking after me, probably to the detriment of himself. He was making sure I was okay as I could be, without probably allowing himself to feel, which is challenging. But at the time, like, he was such a rock. You know, I said he's very pragmatic. And yeah, so I was just in pure, pure survival mode. And I remember, like, I called my mum at, like, the night he was admitted, and Emily was having another sleepover at their house, and I called mum when we got home from the hospital that night. It was about 10 p.m. and I called her, and because my mum's very spiritual, in a sense that she can feel, she's a bit psychic, you know, she can feel things, she knows things ahead of time. I remember when I was living in Melbourne and I lost a ring that was super important to me, and she was able to tell me where it was. She just said, give me some time and I'll see what I can find. And so things like that. Anyway, and I just had to know. And I said, do you feel something? Can you tell, like, what are the signs? Is he going to be okay? And because in my own heart, I knew he was going to be, I can't explain it. I was so sure he was going to be okay, but I wanted to see if mum had any sort of sign or anything. And she hadn't, and she was like, I'm going to look out for it and I'll let you know. And you know, but I just kind of wanted her reassurance that somebody somewhere was telling her he'd be okay. And then actually on the day of his surgery, she was hosing the garden and she saw a rainbow in the hose, and she said, I knew that was the sign that he was going to get through that surgery. But yeah, so I was just, real survival, looking for any little thing that, you know, would help me know that he was going to be okay.
Yeah. And I actually love that you told us about your mum being spiritual, because I think, you know, talking to you, even though you're going through this and it's a lot, there's something in you that feels quite secure, like that you have a secure attachment, that your mum sort of instilled that with you. And so even though this huge turmoil is going on and you're just surviving, the fact that you're like, I knew he would be okay, like that's you're really in touch with yourself and your intuition. And that's not something to gloss over, because that's so rare that people are really that in tune with themselves. So thank you for sharing that. So he goes through his surgery, and obviously it goes well. And what happens then for you? Like, how do you start to see light now? Like, what's the process after that?
As you said, he surgery went really, really well. It went as smooth as it could go. He was only in intensive, like the super intensive care, for 2 nights. I mean, the doctors were sort of giving us, look, it can be 5 to 7 days in intensive care, and then back up onto the other ward, the cardio ward, which is, you know, the NICU ward, and then from there to the kind of normal ward. Like, you know, it was going to be such a long process. And in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, like up and down from the hospital, how am I going to do this? You know, but yeah, he was only in there 2 nights. And every day there was more and more tubes coming out of him. You know, he was on a ventilator initially when he came out, and they were able to take that out the afternoon of the surgery. And yeah, it was so nice seeing all these tubes coming out of him. And they were so impressed with how he was doing. And so I started to see like, okay, like he's got this, like we're going to get there. We're going to get home. We're going to get through this. And then we went up onto the normal or the intensive ward, out of the super intensive. I don't know what it's called. And he was just, they were really happy with him. His wound was healing well. They actually went through the back of him. So when it was heart surgery, they can either go through the front, obviously, but for little babies, they try and go through the back because it's less risky than having them kind of an open heart surgery as such. So his wound on his back was healing well. They were happy with that. It did take about 6 weeks to heal completely, but they were happy with that. And then it was a matter of, okay, the nurses were asking me, because I was still expressing milk, do you want to breastfeed? And I said, absolutely, yes. And so the next, I guess, battle for us was to reestablish his feeding, because he'd been taken away from the breast quite early, he was only 3 days old, and then he'd been off it for, it was a week and a half before I could physically breastfeed him. It was a matter of, okay, can we get that? And in my head I'm like, oh please, I've been expressing milk so much, and I know some mums, God, like I take my hat off to them, they pump all the time, and there are amazing women that pump exclusively, but I just, oh my goodness, it's not for me. And so I was just hoping and praying that he would feed well, because in my head I was like, I have so much milk, like I need him to feed, otherwise, yes, I will be pumping for the rest of my life. So I was able to trial a breastfeed with him. I had the speech pathologist with me to check his latch and things like that, and was he actually sucking milk that sort of thing. And thankfully he did. He just went straight back as if nothing had changed. And so then, we were able to take out his, because he was getting fed through a tube, we were able to remove that. And then I could start to breastfeed him on demand and kind of reestablish those patterns. There was a couple of other with any surgery, of course, there's side effects and, potential things that, one of which I remember the doctors were now going through the surgery with us. So one of the things that could happen was that, paralysis or, hearing impacts and things like that, but obviously thankfully that didn't happen. But one of the other side effects was this, it's called this vocal cord palsy, and when they're doing an operation on the heart, apparently the vocal cords are quite close, and they can just kind of nick the nerves a little bit, and so what that means is that can actually affect their feeding, because it means that like when the vocal cords aren't working in line, they can sort of take in milk, and then it can kind of get into their lungs, which could actually lead to pneumonia and things like that. So it's one of those things they had to monitor, which is why the speech pathologist was there and checking how he was latching and was he feeding okay. They did an ultrasound on his lungs, on his vocal cords, just to see are they in line, and that was a little bit out. So he did have this vocal cord palsy, which did mean when I was reestablishing breastfeeding, I had to feed him, they called it like left side up. So when I wanted to feed him on my right breast, I had to have him in like the football hold. So his left arm was kind of up. So that, I don't know, I never was good at that with my daughter. And so I was going, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And we got there, we did it, because it just meant that his vocal cords could kind of be in line, so he wasn't taking in milk down to his lungs, as long as his left side was kind of pointing up. So we had to do that for about a month or so after he was out of hospital. But then he recovered from that really well. Like that was the only side effect, and it was very minimal compared to some of the greater ones out there. So so that was good. So we reestablished that, and we got we were able to get home. It was on the Monday. His surgery was on the Tuesday the week before, and then the following Monday we were allowed to go home, which was just remarkable considering it, you know, the doctors were warning me it could be 3 or 4 weeks if, you know, if all goes well. But he just recovered so well, and he's such a strong little man. Yeah, it's incredible just how quickly he did recover, and yeah, I'm just so grateful.
Yeah. And so afterwards, when everything kind of settled, did it hit you and your husband? Because essentially there's grief work involved in this, in a process like this, even with these amazing outcomes, there's and I'm interested to know, post this, how have you found support, if you have, like for yourself, for your husband, and just to help other people that might be going through something similar?
Yeah, I think initially, again, I was just kind of focusing on the next step, just get through, get home, get back into life at home with a baby and a toddler. And so I didn't process it for a long time. And it's still like, I think I'm still processing it, to be honest, because it was an absolute trauma, you know, that we experienced, you know, being told that our little baby would die if he didn't have heart surgery, and then the risks associated with heart surgery. You know, they're not, you know, that there's some really risky procedures. So you know, it was, yeah, I think I'm still processing it, and I think I will probably for a long time, to be honest. And I think that's probably one of the reasons too, to be honest, why I reached out to you when you were looking for people, because even just talking about it is really cathartic, you know, just to talk about the experience. And that's what I would say, like, if anybody else is going through this, just finding somebody that you can talk to, whether it's family or friend or a counsellor or a colleague or a stranger, you know, sometimes even talking to people you don't know so well can really help. So yeah, I think I'll be processing it for a while. And in the lead up to our chat, I wrote down a few things, because again, I hadn't sort of, this is probably the most I've voiced it. And so I wrote down a few things, and even that was cathartic as well, just kind of writing down like a bit of a timeline of events and what I experienced. And I wish I'd done that probably earlier. I mean, as a teenager and as a kid, I always loved writing, and I would write things down. And I think I should have done that earlier, kind of go back to my roots of, okay, write down, you know, your feelings or your emotions and get that out of you in that sense. So I think I'm still processing it. With my husband, I said earlier, like he was such a rock, you know. He just wanted to make sure I was okay, because if I was okay, chances are Lucas will be okay. And so he didn't process it for a very long time, and I think again he's still processing it. Probably as a couple we could have done that better, and that's again what I would probably suggest to anyone else as a couple going through this. You know, talk more about it with your partner. Don't just get busy and get into life, you know, when the baby comes home, because you get so distracted, and that's what happens. I think you need to take that time to go, okay, we've experienced a huge life-changing trauma, you know, that I think is, I feel like I'm a different person as a result of it. I feel like I'm a different mum to him than I was to Emily when she was little. And yeah, I just think, you know, you need to talk to each other, and don't just get into the grind, because it's too easy to get into the grind. You need to do the hard yards and talk about the experience.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice. And I think, and also that there's no shame in speaking to a counsellor together, is there? You know, they have the tools to help you have some openings to conversations that are otherwise difficult, because we do want to just move on. You know, where it's our survival instinct, isn't it, as humans?
Yeah.
Like, right, we got through that, let's keep going. But, you know, from experience, this stuff lives in your body. And so, like you said, journaling is so helpful, talking about it. Every time it comes up is another moment for healing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't have to search for it. We don't have to sit there and think about it. It's like things will remind you and come up like that. And in those moments, if we can simply just become aware, oh, here we go, there's grief, or you know, there's that coming up, and be gentle, like you've spoken about. that is actually transcending the trauma. You know,
Yeah.
it's just noticing when it's there and what's triggering it, and you know, making no judgment about it.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
so harsh on ourselves, but I'm so grateful for you sharing this story, because it's really it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable work, but you know, without vulnerability, we lack connection. And I think that this is what this is about. And I would love to know, as a closing, what you've learned further from this trauma, because every trauma is a teaching. And
Yeah.
and what's come out for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'm still learning. As I said, as I kind of process it, I think there's things that pop up. But I think the biggest learning is like just how precious, you know, life is, and that it can just change in an instant, and you can't control that. So just, you know, being grateful for those moments. And, you know, as a mum, I feel like I'm different, you know, to him in that I'm much more. I think with when Emily was little, you know, I had in my mind that, oh, look, you know, you should be sleeping in your bed, and you should, you know, surely you don't need to be fed again, or you don't need to be cuddled this much, you know. And I learned that she did, and I gave into it. I did that for her, but it took me a little while to sort of understand that, I think. Whereas with Lucas, like having this experience, I'm just like, just let me hold you and cuddle you, and I will do whatever I can to nurture you and keep you safe, as much for him and myself as well, just to have him, you know, close to me. You know, I'm much more patient, I think, in that, you know, I understand again just how fragile life is, and you just got to go with it, and accept these little bumps. And, you know, I mean, I know that sometimes the sleep deprivation gets the better of me, and I get frustrated and things like that. But, you know, I do try to be more understanding and patient, and just kind of more willing to be in the moment more. I think I can do that better once the sleep deprivation gets a little bit better. But just trying to be more present with both my kids, and just kind of just understanding, wow, like life can change so quickly. Just don't sweat the big stuff. Like, you know, just be grateful and happy for what you have right now. And I mean, even with Lucas, you know, he is going to have cardio checks for the rest of his life. We've got one coming up next week, and that's a little trigger all the time. Like, oh God, like what if they find something? What if there is a chance he will need to have further surgery if his aorta starts to thin again? It doesn't mean he's completely out of the woods. And, you know, so kind of going, okay, just, you know, trying not to focus too much on that as much as I can, and just be in the moment.
That's really, thank you. That's really helpful. And it's exactly what you said. Like, what we learn from these things is we really have zero control. But the things we can control within ourselves is how we react, and how we respond, and how we learn. You know, that's all we can take charge of, really. But from that kind of sense of security can grow, you know, when you're like, you know what, I have done the work that I need to do for myself, which means I can show up better for the people that I love. So I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So much for sharing this story, Shannon.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.